Well, yeah, I'm really happy to be here and had a great experience working with Jean and with your faculty. So I guess I'll just give an overview of who we are to start. So the International Rescue Committee was started in 1933 by Albert Einstein and a group of his friends. And they were escaping Western Europe. And once they got to the United States, they kind of felt guilty, essentially. There were only a handful of them, physicists and kind of very bright people, feeling guilty about all of the people in Western Europe that were basically stranded at that time. So at his behest, and really there was a guy named Varian Fry, who was the main guy. He was kind of he was trying to do film and had his fingers in a lot of different pies, but ended up basically assembling one of the largest underground railroads for Jews to escape Nazi Germany throughout the 30s and late 30s and 40s. So that's how the IRC was really kind of born, was out of the World War II. Today we are in the worst humanitarian crisis since that time. So there are more people displaced now than at any time since 1945. It's about 1 out of every 115 people on the planet is currently displaced from their home. So even while we'll be here talking today, about 5 people will lose their home and be forced to flee. So that's who the IRC is there for, and that's who that was our mission from the start. Really in 1951 is when the IRC kind of took the shape that it is now, and that's when the Soviets invaded Hungary. That was the first large-scale resettlement process organized by our federal government in collaboration with nonprofit organizations. And then in 1980, with the Refugee Act being signed, that's when things were really formalized as a process through federal funding, through the federal government. Yes, we're active in 43 countries around the world. We're serving about 26 million people who are displaced worldwide. Here in the United States, we're active in 28 U.S. cities. Richmond was number 27. Missoula, Montana opened just after we did. We had plans to open 3 additional sites in Asheville, North Carolina. What's the place in South Carolina? Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil.
Charleston.
No.
Savannah. Yes.
Savannah.
Georgia.
Savannah, Georgia.
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
Sorry. That's right. And Spokane, Washington. So that's off the table now. So we're probably what we're going to have for the foreseeable future. Here in Richmond, we're resettling 150 people a year, which is probably the smallest of the IRC network. So I was working previously in Phoenix, Arizona. We would resettle 150 people in a month regularly. We resettled 280 people 1 month while I was working there, over 1,350 people a year in some years. So very, very large operations. I would say though that I'm finding this much more meaningful, even though it's, some people say just 150 people, but that's life-changing services that we're offering to 150 people. And we're doing so in a way that's very community-facing and embracing. So we're really finding ways, that's why I'm here today, to find ways to collaborate with resettlement. There's been kind of we exist behind a curtain and we get federal funding and we are happy with our services. I think those days are really kind of over. The future really is community engagement, finding fundraising mechanisms and opportunities with partners in the community, and really not relying on federal government dollars to carry out the programs that we want to provide, and instead of have to provide because of the mandate that we're given. We consider ourselves a public-private partnership, a PPP. So that means that yes, we do receive federal funding, but a third of our funding, the goal is for a third of our funding to be raised locally through our own small offices. And we're actually doing a pretty good job of that. We've consistently met that goal. in Charlottesville and here in Richmond in our first years. So we just opened our office here in Richmond in October 2015, so we're just 2 years old. We're a sub-office of Charlottesville. Charlottesville's been around for 20 years, so they've really been able to provide that expertise, all of the administrative, finance, and oversight of, through our executive director is through Charlottesville. But we still have a very, I would say, a pretty open slate to interact with the public and carry out missions as we see fit here locally. What else to say? Most of the people we're serving now, because this last year has been so chaotic, after the election and then the executive order, everything that had existed since the Refugee Act of 1980 started to be put into doubt and then to be dismantled in some ways. So we've been primarily serving what's called special immigrant visa holders here in Richmond. So those are folks from Afghanistan. It was actually initially started for interpreters from Iraq. So in 2005, the US government started the SIV program, Special Immigrant Visa Program, to help those interpreters who were in harm's way and who had risked everything for our mission to be brought to the United States. The Iraq version closed about 1.5 years ago, but the Afghan version is in full swing. The situation in Afghanistan is continuing to deteriorate, including into the capital city of Kabul, which is new. It had been a relatively safe place. So there's a lot of people who have been involved with the U.S. mission there in different ways, not just as interpreters, but as civil engineers with the Army Corps of Engineers, as even just clerks and administrators. So they've been put in grave danger, and as a result, that is our primary population that we're serving here in Richmond right now, about 75% of last year's arrivals. With the travel ban that the Trump administration put in place, no refugees have arrived here in Richmond since May of last year. And so we've been only serving this SIV population. And it's really kind of helped to keep us afloat. What the future looks like, we're not exactly sure, which is why we're really trying to do a bigger push for our own local fundraising. We're talking of potentially serving other people, not just refugees or SIV, but really looking at people who get asylum. So they are eligible for our services. Victims of human trafficking are eligible for our services. And they have similar guidelines, but when we tack on foundation funding or local fundraising efforts, we're not bound to the same time constraints. So instead of serving people for a 6-month program, we could really serve people indefinitely. The federal government has a cap on our services for 5 years. At that point, refugees, SIV, other folks are supposed to become citizens. But with our own funding mechanisms, we can continue to serve people on throughout their time of need, essentially. And that's really what I think our goal is for the long term, is to have malleable programming that we can meet clients where they're at and not who just fits into our box.
Thank you. Karen-Marie, would you mind sharing with us what it looks like from a volunteer's perspective as you interact with folks and help them get places and address the more practical aspects of life?
Right. Yeah. So I first actually heard about IRC because the congregation I'm a part of, St. John's UCC, was looking at partnering with a Jewish synagogue to sponsor a family. But we discovered, the 3 of us who came from St. John's, that the synagogue really had things covered in spades. And yet I heard Stephen speak about the needs and the needs for volunteers, and so ended up doing the application and the security check, et cetera, to do that. And I have mostly taken people places. So I've taken a family to get their children registered in school and helped explain some of what was being said as asked, and also been the person who could provide the phone number to an on-the-phone translator as needed, which is one of those pieces. I've taken a family, actually a different family, to I do. I can't remember now what the appointment was, but then the son needed to actually go to the emergency room because of a health issue that had flared up. And so because I had time, I actually went and took them to the hospital and sat while that got dealt with and returned them home. I've also taken an Afghani young man who's doing job exploration and job training, and actually was very talkative and wanted to think about sort of eventually what might be educational opportunities and kind of the work he had done there and how that would and wouldn't translate here, but had good conversations with him. And one of the things he talked about that I thought was sort of interesting, again, as we in Richmond are trying to think about better public transportation, was how isolated he is without transportation in his home. And having actually donated a vehicle to a Northern Virginia refugee resettlement group for a family this past January who needed it for work and other kinds of things, was aware that that's a major need. And I know there's been calls for bicycles at times and other sorts of things. I've also donated items to meet some of those needs. And so I find that some of the families or individuals talk about, kind of initiate conversations, and others are, the one family that I took over to the hospital, the father was the only one who spoke any English at all. And so at the point where I was, hanging out with the mother and the other child, she would pantomime when she needed to try to make a call in because she couldn't figure out how to get the phone to work, and and show me, and we figured out that's what she needed. She was trying to call back and to speak to her husband about what was going on, and so I get to kind of be that resource. But I find that the most important thing is to just sort of be there and not assume too much about what's needed. I don't ask many questions, but I engage as they seem to want to engage. And I wish I actually had more time. I mean, it is complicated because some of the health, I know they go to the health department, and that can be long appointments. There was a very large family in need of some transportation for that. And but like this ESL class that's starting up, which is a kind of there's regular things, and then there's the things that pop up in email and on the Facebook page. And it's sort of a informal, formal process, in that things go up and the first person who responds and says, I can do it, gets more info, and it happens. And sometimes it changes. But I found that the individuals that I'm working with are always really appreciative of the time and energy that people put in to help them do what they need to do. But I also find that it's the kind of voluntary thing where I need to be flexible, because there's a time, but it might take an hour, it might take 90 minutes, it might take a couple of hours. The staff try to indicate how long they think it will be, but the truth is that it's just sort of a need to be there when you need to be there. And I really appreciate the staff and the way that they're always, again, quick to jump in and assist if needed, but it hasn't been a lot that's been needed so far.
I think, Jean, your experience kind of echoes a little bit what Karen-Marie just shared in terms of the not knowing whether we're going to do 30 minutes or 2 hours, and the transportation issues. I know that was an issue with the family that you worked with. So.
Usually, I had an internship this summer, and in the end, it was really great to me. Great experience to me, because I taught some Congo lady in English, and I usually gave a lot of ride to the refugees, to the hospital or to IRC or back. But teaching English was a really interesting experience, because she could not speak any of English at all. So the only technique that I could use for her is like repetition and body language. But that was really interesting to me, because it just gave me another perspective to kind of minor or some non-speaking English-speaking people. It was really interesting. But the more interesting experience was just giving the refugees a ride, because usually when I give a ride to the refugees, to the hospital, I have to wait. I have to spend almost an hour in the waiting room in the hospital, but And we just started, when we started conversation, actually I don't need to speak any. They just kept talking and talking about their own story. Because their anxiety is so high, but they do not have any transportation here, so I think they felt like they are really isolated from the community. So, and even though there are lots of social workers in IRC, and they could give them some specific help, like kind of a financial aid and other like transportation. But I think they need somebody else who just listen to their anxiety itself. So then I could feel that their anxiety level was like lowered after them talking. So. And then I think I just experienced some kind of diversity, cultural diversity in the life. Because they sometimes when they just got interested in me and they asked, "What are you doing in Richmond?" So I'm studying in the seminary. What do you study? Theology? Oh, study about Allah. This is the information. So no, it's a kind of a Christian God, and then we just at the time just recognize that our world views are different. So it's a kind of a living experience. It was really good. I'm not sure about IRC and refugees.
And I really appreciate you bringing it up because it really addresses the diverse environment, whether it's culturally, economic, whether it's religious. People coming together and people sharing in their common need and being together and sometimes just being present to each other. What an incredible gift that is. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Are there other questions? Do we want to continue in this vein, just talking about what it means to...
Well, I just want to note one other thing too, which is, after I'd taken the family whose son needed to be seen in the emergency room, we had a few prescriptions that needed to be filled. And what I was really heartened by, not having done much of this kind of work in Richmond before, was we ended up having to go to 3 different pharmacies because one of the things was not in stock. But everyone we went to, the folks who worked in the pharmacy were very, very responsive and wanting to help. And one of them even called around the second one to figure out where it was that we wanted to go. But they also found discount coupons and gave them so they could get their drug cheaper. And there was just this whole way in which people were very supportive of this family. And we hear so much about the kind of negativity around refugees, and you know that Virginia can be a very diverse and divisive kind of place, but at least in the experience of the sort of neighborhood where because these were all pharmacies that could have been walkable from where the family was living. We were hitting all the, the Kroger and the CVS and the Walmart, whatever, Walgreens. That there, it seemed like people were eager to help. And so it was heartening to see this. And I know the father in that family, who was the one who was going into the stores with me, said, he felt like he could come back later on his own and they would understand his needs, which I was really appreciative of, because I felt a little helplessness as we were going from place to place. And I'm thinking, what do you do if we can't get this and he can't get somewhere else? And I'd have called the office and said, here, there's this issue, but thankfully the third time was the charm.
I'm interested to know, what was the path that brought you to this work?
Sure. It was a bit of a winding road, but so I grew up in a rural part of Oregon, and I was working a lot with Latino farm workers, kind of by Pendleton area.
Where?
Are you?
Portland.
Okay. I grew up not like in Ione, Heppner?
Yes.
Heppner, Oregon?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my mom was a teacher in Heppner.
Oh, okay, cool.
We lived in Ione. Yeah. So that was kind of my first exposure of working with people who were sometimes as migrants, but even as forced migration. Mm-hmm. And I really just got very interested in forced migration specifically. Mm-hmm. So I went to University of Oregon, and that was really kind of what I looked at there. International studies was my major, but really kind of looking at refugees, urbanization kind of issues. And then after I graduated, I started working with at-risk youth in Portland. And some of the first kids on my kind of caseload were Burmese refugee kids. And they just I just got to know their families and really became very fascinated with what was going on in Burma and as refugees, kind of what was happening about that time. So I went and got a master's degree and studied international development, but really also still looked at forced migration kind of primarily. And
was that at U of O or somewhere else?
No, I went to the UK and did that at the University of Birmingham, and so they had a really interesting program. They brought in people from all over the world, and the UK has a really kind of advanced model of bringing in people from other socioeconomic backgrounds from all over the world to study together. And I learned a lot from classmates and professors there. But upon finishing, we moved back, and I had just married my wife, and I was looking for a job. So I started volunteering with IRC in Phoenix, never thinking that I'd be here 10 years later almost. So it's the way life goes. But I started working with human trafficking, on the human trafficking team there. And then as an employment specialist, and then employment supervisor, and then resettlement program supervisor. And then this opportunity came open, and I was ready for something not so hot as Phoenix. And this feels a lot like Oregon.
You can have Phoenix in the summer, and the heat in the summer, and the cool Oregon's cool in the winter. Yeah, that's good.
No, it's getting worse out there though.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
When people are teaching ESL classes, is there any type of resources, like you were saying, that they didn't speak anything? I mean, are there any resources given to the teachers? Do you guys use Rosetta Stone if there's like nothing or anything?
So it's been kind of a trial and error. I mean, we have a lot of material, not all of it sticks, and some of it's good for some. Like, Jean was working with a Congolese family where I think the mother was essentially pre-literate even in her own language. So, I think it depends on who we're working with. So we tend to have a lot, and we're continuing to amass more and more. But we kind of try things until something works, and that's really part of what we realize we need to do better with volunteer orientation, is that this isn't a rigid curriculum, that we're expecting volunteers to, just as as Karen-Marie was saying, like sometimes you're going to bend, sometimes you're going to do something that wasn't in the lesson plan, sometimes the day can go in a completely different direction, and it's part of rolling with the punches, but seeing what will elevate the client, in the best way possible. That's really what the goal is. So we have some curriculum. Our instruction specialist on staff, she grew up in Algeria, and so she learned English in Algeria, but then moved to the United States later. So she has some really good worldview, kind of world experience. And she's able to impart that, but of course it's just always different with who we're working with. So we're interested in using Rosetta Stone in the home to give people, so with a Henrico library card, they can get free Rosetta Stone in the home. So we're really interested in helping people develop more kind of self-guided or self-starter services, and not relying on us for like every activity. And we've been doing a bit better at that, this is our second year going into resettling newly arriving refugee families. So we learned a lot through the first year through kind of trial and error. But I think we're getting there.
That's good.
Yeah.
Going with that, if they weren't doing it at home, then obviously there must be a big digital divide with these people coming in. So what about computers, cell phones? Like, how are we getting kids access to information and that kind of side?
Yeah, so we get a cell phone for every family that comes in, and then we get a second for the family, a free phone for the family after they qualify for their initial benefits. And through those, they've been able to work out like some of the Rosetta Stone, which is pretty straight ahead of push the button. But we have a goal of getting a computer lab started. and maybe even getting donated. So we've been working with kind of a tech company here to see if they'll give us their old laptops where we could then gift to clients. But we're really interested, I think, in having kind of a digital literacy class. A lot of folks are kind of down the ways a little bit and understand it very well. Others would have no concept of how to turn it on or let alone how to use it.
And that's huge for job placement because so
Yeah.
many
Yes.
jobs have computers. So
Totally,
that's
yeah.
huge.
And for children in school, so we have an intern now that we just made. Her job description is getting discount internet in the home. So after they go to public school, they can qualify for the $10 a month internet service, and they can get a laptop for about $30.
That's impressive.
So I think that's something we're really pushing hard to try to get kids even before they start school so that they can do some studying. You know, we do have some English tutors going into homes that are really trying to work with women and children specifically before the kids start school, so they have a little bit of practice at least before they go into the classroom. Those are areas we want to continue to get better in.
Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed when I took the family to register for school in Henrico, was that there's a point at which they no longer qualify for the summer services in terms of ESL
Right.
classes. So
After May 5th.
yeah, so like the family I took was past that point by like a week.
Yeah.
But it was, you know, so that was being explained, and I just kept thinking, you know, I know there are reasons on that that have to do with finances about how those budgets and things get set, but that meant those kids didn't have access to, you know, doing the language work before they were going to start in the fall. And I was looking online trying to figure out our libraries doing this and that, and there seem to be more things for adults, but not a lot for kids. In fact, they often say don't bring your children because the focus is on doing the work. So it does seem like there's some gaps in terms of how to provide summertime, especially support kinds of things.
Yeah, and that's a program we would love to build, I think, in the next few years, of a youth program, because yeah, I think more and more data and information is coming out that, you know, even when kids speak good English, that doesn't necessarily mean they have a strong grasp of the language, let alone the ability to do well academically. So academic fluency, I think, it's a topic that's really starting to be explored more. And, you know, it's unfortunate, but kids are also pulled out of school because their parents have an appointment and their parents need interpretation and it's not being provided. So another thing we're really watching closely is if there is an appointment that they have to go to and they receive federal funds, they are obligated to provide interpretive services. That's part of Title VI, you know, through the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So that's something that I've called a few places on, because kids should never be taken out of school to do an activity that their parents are needing to accomplish.
Speaking of the children, what about emotional support for PTSD from or even emotional just for the family as a whole? What's provided?
So the health department does they're responsible for the initial health screening, immunizations, and mental health screening and follow-up of all incoming clients. They do what's called an RHS 15. It's very kind of scary sounding title. It's a mental health assessment. They do it for all members of the household, except children under 5. I think children under 5 are they're basically too young to do the test. So if they're flagged through that test, they qualify for 12 free counseling sessions through the health department. And then our health liaison is able to, because Medicaid is received after that time, our health liaison is then able to make referrals for counseling using Medicaid outside of the health department. For young children, we've also talked with Child Help International, who has some services and expertise in that field, and Safe Harbor. Both of them are interested in working with us. Honestly, it's not something that has been elevated to a situation of extreme need, or even something that we've been told my child is having problems with this or that. I think typically that's because most of the refugee children, and even those kids like from Syria, the ones that we were resettling early in the year, escaped Syria very early. So they were kind of at the forefront of the civil war. And so they were in Jordan for almost 5 years, some of them over 5 years. And many refugees, so the average time of displacement for refugees who entered the United States last year was 15 years. So children are oftentimes born in camps or in urban areas. And so their experience with direct trauma that their parents might have endured really is not as significant right now. It's something that we're trying to prepare for in the future if our population changes. And there's a group of refugees that did have a recent traumatic experience. The SIV are more likely to have had a traumatic experience, but again, that would have likely been focused on the husband who was employed by the US government. And so oftentimes those guys don't talk a lot about their experiences or say much, but every now and then we'll hear a story of what they've been through or what's happened, and it's obvious that they need to talk to someone, and we try to set that up. Yeah.
To shift the focus just a little bit for a moment, you did mention that because of recent developments in terms of fundings for organizations like yours, you are now going into more of a fundraising mode. What does that look like for you, and also how do you work with groups in the community?
A good question. So I think in many ways we kind of have a tiered approach. We have a person at headquarters who's our major gifts officer, and so what she's really trying to do is look at people who've been giving steadily and maybe in increasing amounts over time to see if we can bring them up even to a larger amount. So that's kind of a larger pot of money. We also are really looking at local foundations. We just received a grant from the Community Foundation. We're going to start a community health worker program where former refugees will be going into homes to provide instruction on safety, nutrition, well-being. So local foundations are definitely, we're pursuing those. I'm writing another grant right now. So we're continually writing grants. But then I think at the local level and at the smaller level, we've made a goal for all of our families that arrive to not have to spend a penny on their initial startup costs. And so that $1,000 per person that's given per family, when we start taking furniture out of that, pots and pans, every small thing.
Especially when you have like people who are just one person.
And then we're in real trouble. Yeah, we're in real trouble. But even a family of 5 or 6, that money is, oftentimes when a family arrives, we've spent out the money. So we've made a goal to get in-kind items. So we have a specific list of items we have to provide through our government contract through the State Department. We want to get all of that donated. We want to see if people would donate things like bus cards that are other things we have to purchase with their money. The welcome food, so when they arrive from the airport, we have a hot meal ready to eat. Last year, a modeling company bought a lot of vouchers for the halal market, the Mediterranean bakery. So those types of things are really a great way for the public to interact. And oftentimes it's very easy for church congregations, instead of time, which as Americans we often don't have, but as stuff, it's often easier for us to accumulate that over a month. Say if you put out a drive over a month, we're collecting these items as a checklist, and then they go to the organization.
What about house goods and stuff like that?
Absolutely, yeah. Lamps, kitchenware in particular.
Clothes?
Winter clothing in particular.
I know there was somebody in the Jewish synagogue that owned a mattress company, and I think was providing mattresses for multiple apartments.
So that was kind of the ultimate example. That we were concerned that all of these mentors and this large group of people were going to be pouring all of this support on a family of 5. We were kind of thinking like, how can we spread this out a little bit?
Because there were like 20 people in the room.
Yeah. But they were able to get free mattresses for this family of 5, and so I asked them, well, do you think that they would be interested in providing a free mattress for every person that comes in to, through our services?
Yeah.
And they said yes. And so, instead of getting cheap $200 mattresses, which still eats a lot of that money up, even though the cheapest ones, we are now getting kind of top of the line, like $900 mattresses for free. So that's exactly the kind of thing that we would love to see carried forward. If a place has a way to get pillows, new pillows or linens that are new, there's certain items that we really want to have new because, just as dignity and, people walking into a new home.
Yeah.
But there's certainly items like especially kitchenware and other things that we realize lightly used is going to be the best. But that's something that I'm really pushing hard, and honestly, I'm just as excited about trying to work with people on doing that as I am at, $50,000 to $100,000 grants, because that's the local buy-in that we're trying to create.
Yeah. Where would you store donations like that? Do you have a place?
We've got a small space that could do, So if it all came in at once, we may be in trouble, but if it was staggered throughout the year, I think we'd be okay.
Yeah.
And I'd be happy to share the kind of core item list that we have,
That'd be great.
if you all have ideas of how to accomplish that.
Yeah, that'd be very helpful.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Other questions?
I didn't talk much about our career advancement program, but that's really exciting as well. So I'll just really quickly, as you were saying, we have some pretty high skilled people coming into the country. We also have some people who have a lot of ambition but have been denied opportunity. So there's kind of two really kind of crucial groups of people we're looking at. So the career advancement program, we wrote a small grant and got funding from our headquarters for an additional amount. And basically what we're trying to do is convince people to take that lower level job that's beneath them and hold it for 90 days. And then we're inviting people back to put through we're calling bridge classes. So just because they have a skill or they have a lot of experience, that doesn't mean that that's in need here. So carpet weaving is not going to be a big job here, but your understanding of how sewing works and textile, working with small attention to detail, if we pick out skills and look at what kinds of careers would benefit from someone like you, we can help guide people. And so we've made a partnership with Community College Workforce Alliance at J. Sargent Reynolds, and they have a series of credentials and licenses that instead of being, $4,000, $5,000, they've made a strategic initiative and lowered those prices. And if you are below a certain income, they can fall significantly even more. So we've had about 10 people complete courses there in things like certified medical assistant, certified logistics technician, so people working on shipping. A lot of people from Afghanistan have a lot of experience in that field. So we're also looking, and not just at men who have experience and who are kind of from well-to-do families and have had a lot of opportunity, but also at women who maybe have been denied. So those are the ones who have completed the certified medical assistant, certified nurse assistant, finding ways to be kind of creative and helping them identify that career path and really go for it. It's helped us create buy-in at the front end for those kind of lower level jobs, knowing that there's something waiting on the back end. And we have people come in and talk to the clients like about what they, with the program they went through and what they're doing now, to kind of plant that seed and create a little bit of hope. So.
How long can people stay in your program? I mean, is there a time frame with which you have to work?
So 5 years for the core program. So that's funded through the Office of Refugee Resettlement in the federal government through Department of Health and Human Services. Funnels that through the state of Virginia. We contract through the state of Virginia, and those services are capped at 5 years. But like I said, we wrote a grant to a private foundation for the career advancement, which basically opens that up. So where we may have been limited before, we can now, just because someone hit their 5-year mark, if they have something that we're really wanting to help with, we're not limited anymore. And that's really kind of at the heart of what we want to be. You know, we want to do a really good job with those core services that we're required to do, and that, you know, is really the backbone of who we are. But we also want to provide really unique kind of ongoing services. In Phoenix, they had really great financial programming. So they had an entrepreneurship program where they were helping people start small businesses, home ownership program. So down the road, we would love, you know, maybe 5-10 years from now, we would love to be kind of in that realm of helping people achieve kind of larger asset building and financial growth programming. Yeah.
When I did the interview in Charlottesville, when I asked one of the workers there who was a former refugee what was her goal when coming to America, and it was stability and security for her children, education for her children, citizenship, and home ownership were the 4 goals when she came here, and she achieved all of those. So it was like, it was really cool. It's just things that we take for granted.
Yeah.
Just simple stability being the top.
And assumptions too, because I think, you know, last year there were 3 bills in the House of Delegates that were kind of anti-immigrant, anti-refugee bills. And one of the assumptions was that refugees arrived and were a major drain on local resources. But just recently a study was done, it was started by the Trump administration and has kind of been kept out of view. They found between 2004 and 2014, refugees contributed $63 billion to the US economy. Refugees are 3 times more likely than Americans to open a small business. And yeah, the ability for people to save and buy a home, Americans can't do that, especially at the rate that refugees are. I mean, it's impressive how fast people can get started, and our assumption of people who are in great need, you know, there's a need at the beginning, there's no doubt, but typically people find a way as they have throughout their lives, you know, and refugees who come here in particular, the 0.1% of refugees worldwide are the ones that come here. So they really do find a way typically, yeah.
Well, I really want to thank you for your time, for spending
Absolutely,
your time.
thank you. Thank you, Jean. Thanks, yeah.
Thank you